We've made our decision about the head chef position. This was it. The moment that would either validate everything I'd worked toward or send me back to searching for a new direction in life. We were impressed with all of our candidates, Rebecca continued. Sophie has the experience and technical skills to run this kitchen effectively. The other external candidates brought impressive credentials and innovative ideas. My heart was sinking with each word. This was the gentle letdown, the explanation of why someone else was better qualified. But you, Rebecca said, her tone shifting, brought something we hadn't expected. You have a palate that can't be taught, an instinct for flavor that most chefs spend decades trying to develop. More importantly, you have the kind of leadership style that brings out the best in everyone around you. Maya, Marcus added, we'd like to offer you the position of head chef at Copper and Time. The words didn't register immediately. I sat there staring at them, waiting for the punchline or the conditions that would make the offer less real than it sounded. Are you serious? I finally managed. Completely serious, Rebecca said, sliding the folder across the desk. Your contract, salary details, and the responsibilities we'll expect you to handle. Take your time reviewing everything, but we'd like an answer by Monday. I picked up the folder with hands that were trembling slightly. Head chef. The title I'd fantasized about during countless nights of experimental cooking in my apartment kitchen. The responsibility I'd dreamed of and feared in equal measure. What about Sophie? Sophie will remain as sous chef if she chooses to stay. We've discussed the situation with her, and she understands our reasoning. We hope you two can continue working together, because you make a strong team. After they left me alone to review the contract, I sat in the quiet office trying to process what had just happened. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a data analyst whose biggest culinary achievement was a lasagna that got brutally criticized at a company potluck. Now I was being offered the chance to lead the kitchen at one of Portland's most respected restaurants. The salary was more than I'd ever made in my corporate career. The benefits included health insurance, paid vacation, and a profit-sharing plan that would give me a stake in the restaurant's success. But more than the financial package, this represented everything I'd ever wanted from a career. The chance to create something meaningful, to lead a team of talented cooks, to serve food that brought people joy. I found Sophie in the prep kitchen, methodically brunoising vegetables, with the kind of focused intensity that meant she was working through complicated emotions. Sophie, congratulations, she said without looking up from her cutting board. Marcus told me, you deserve it, Maya, you really do. I want you to stay. I need you to stay. I can't do this job without your experience and expertise. She finally met my eyes, and I saw a mixture of disappointment and professional resolve. I'll stay, at least for now. This kitchen needs stability during the transition, and I'm not going to abandon the team because my ego got bruised. It's not about ego, Sophie. You were qualified for this position. In a lot of ways, more qualified than me. But they didn't choose qualifications. They chose potential. And honestly, Maya, I can see what they saw in you. You have something special as a cook. Something that can't be learned from textbooks or culinary school. Over the weekend, I called everyone important in my life to share the news. Danny whooped so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. My parents, who'd never quite understood my decision to leave data analysis for kitchen work, finally seemed to grasp that this wasn't just a career change. It was a calling. Monday morning, I signed the contract and officially became the youngest head chef in Copper and Time's history. The first few weeks were overwhelming in ways I hadn't anticipated. Suddenly, every decision about the menu, the kitchen workflow, the staff schedule, and the food quality fell to me. The other cooks looked to me for guidance. Marcus expected regular reports on food costs and inventory, and customers continued to expect the same high standards they'd always received. I started arriving at the restaurant at 10 in the morning and staying until after midnight, learning the business side of running a kitchen while maintaining the cooking standards that had earned me the position. Food ordering, vendor negotiations, recipe costing, staff evaluations. All the administrative tasks that Chef Harrison had handled invisibly were now my responsibility. The first menu I developed as head chef was intentionally conservative. I kept most of Copper and Time's signature dishes while adding 3 new items that showcased techniques I'd mastered during my weeks on the line. A pan-seared halibut with saffron beurre blanc, braised short ribs with root vegetable puree, and a chocolate tart with salted caramel that had been perfected through dozens of late-night experiments. The night we launched the new menu, I was more nervous than I'd been during my first service as a line cook. These weren't just dishes I was contributing to. They were creations that bore my name as head chef, my vision for what Copper and Thyme could become. The halibut was the first to go out, and I watched from the pass as the server delivered it to a table of 4 who'd been coming to the restaurant for years. They cut into the fish, tasted it thoughtfully, and I held my breath waiting for their reaction. Smiles. Nods of approval. One diner called the server over to compliment the dish. My first menu item as head chef had passed its initial test. By the end of the evening, we'd sold out of both the short ribs and the chocolate tart. The halibut had been ordered 12 times, and the servers reported that several tables had asked specifically about the new chef's background. Maya, Marcus said as we closed down the kitchen. That was a hell of a debut. The food was exceptional, the kitchen ran smoothly, and the servers couldn't stop talking about how much the customers loved everything. But my real validation came from the kitchen staff. Sophie, who could have made my transition difficult, instead stepped up as my strongest supporter. She anticipated problems before they occurred, trained new cooks with patience and skill, and never made me feel like she resented my promotion over her experience. "You're a natural leader," she told me one night as we finished prep for the next day. "I was worried about working under someone with so little experience, but you listen to advice, make decisive calls, and you never ask anyone to do something you wouldn't do yourself." 3 months into my role as head chef, Copper and Thyme received a review from Portland Monthly that called our food inspired but approachable, sophisticated without being pretentious. The reviewer specifically mentioned the halibut dish and the chocolate tart as examples of a kitchen that understands both classical technique and modern sensibilities. I framed that review and hung it in the kitchen, not because I needed external validation, but because it represented how far I'd come from the woman whose lasagna had been dismissed as amateur at a company potluck. 6 months after taking over as head chef, Marcus approached me with news that would test everything I'd built. "Maya, I got a call from Victoria Ashford's assistant. She wants to do a full review of Copper and Thyme for her upcoming book about Portland's dining scene." The familiar knot of anxiety formed in my stomach. "When?" "Next month. She'll come in multiple times, different nights, trying different dishes. It's the kind of comprehensive review that can really establish a restaurant's reputation." I'd successfully avoided thinking about Victoria Ashford for months, focusing instead on the daily challenges of running a kitchen and developing my skills as a chef. But now she was coming back into my world, this time to judge not just my cooking, but my leadership of an entire culinary operation. The difference was that now I had something to lose. Copper and Thyme's reputation, my team's jobs, my own career as a head chef, all of it could be affected by Victoria's assessment. "Marcus, there's something I need to tell you about my history with Victoria Ashford." I explained the potluck incident, the humiliation, the way her critique had nearly convinced me to give up cooking entirely. Marcus listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail. "So she's the reason you were available to work here in the first place," he said when I finished. "What do you mean?" "Maya, if Victoria Ashford hadn't crushed your confidence at that potluck, would you have left your data analysis job to stage at a restaurant? Would you have been looking for a career change that led you to our kitchen?" I'd never thought about it that way. Probably not. Then maybe we should thank her. Not for being cruel, but for inadvertently setting in motion the chain of events that brought you to us. Victoria's first visit happened on a Tuesday night in October. I didn't know she was there until Sophie mentioned seeing her at table 7, discreetly photographing her dishes and taking notes in her leather journal. From the kitchen, I could see her table clearly. She ordered the pan-seared halibut, my signature dish, along with the braised short ribs and 2 of our appetizers. I watched her taste each component methodically, the same precise evaluation process I remembered from the potluck. But this time, instead of panic, I felt a strange sense of calm. The food leaving my kitchen was the best work I'd ever done. The halibut was perfectly cooked, the sauce properly emulsified, the plating consistent with the standards I'd spent months establishing. Whatever Victoria thought of it, I knew it represented my growth as a chef. She returned twice more over the next 3 weeks, trying different dishes and observing our service with the professional assessment that had made her Portland's most influential food critic. Each time, I focused on maintaining our standards rather than trying to impress her specifically. The review appeared in Portland Monthly 6 weeks later. Marcus found me in the walk-in cooler doing inventory and handed me his phone with the article already open. "You need to read this." I took the phone with trembling hands, not sure I was ready to face Victoria Ashford's verdict on my career as a head chef. "Copper and Time, A Kitchen Transformed," read the headline. Under new head chef Maya Rodriguez, Copper and Time has evolved from a solid neighborhood restaurant into a destination worthy of serious culinary attention. Rodriguez, who took over the kitchen 6 months ago, brings a sophisticated palate and confident technique to classic preparations that never feel overwrought or pretentious. I had to read that paragraph 3 times before the words registered. Victoria Ashford was praising my cooking. The pan-seared halibut with saffron beurre blanc demonstrates Rodriguez's understanding of both flavor balance and textural contrast. The fish is cooked to perfection, the sauce is silken without being heavy, and the accompanying vegetables provide the right amount of acidity to brighten the dish. This is the kind of cooking that makes you understand why simple preparations, executed flawlessly, will always outshine flashy techniques that prioritize presentation over taste. The review continued for another 8 paragraphs, praising not just individual dishes but my overall vision for the restaurant's direction. She called the chocolate tart a masterclass in dessert composition and described the short ribs as, quote, comfort food elevated to fine dining standards without losing its soul. But the final paragraph was what made my hands shake as I read it. Rodriguez represents the best of the new generation of chefs. Technically skilled but unpretentious, creative but respectful of tradition, ambitious but grounded in the fundamentals that make great cooking timeless. Copper and Time has found its identity under her leadership, and Portland's dining scene is better for it. 4 stars. 4 stars. The highest rating Victoria Ashford gave to any restaurant. I looked up to find Marcus grinning at me from the doorway of the walk-in cooler. "So," he said, "how does it feel to get a 4-star review from the critic who almost convinced you to quit cooking?" The question hit me with unexpected emotional force. 7 months ago, Victoria Ashford's dismissal of my lasagna had nearly ended my culinary dreams before they really began. Now, the same woman was calling me one of Portland's most promising chefs. But the strangest part was how little her praise meant compared to the satisfaction I got from running my kitchen every night. Victoria's review was gratifying, certainly, but it didn't change the fundamental joy I found in creating menus, leading my team, and serving food that made people happy. The review brought immediate changes to Copper and Time. Reservations became harder to get, food bloggers started requesting interviews, and other restaurants began trying to poach my cooks with higher salaries. Success, I learned, brought its own set of challenges. 2 weeks after the review appeared, Victoria herself returned to the restaurant. She made a reservation under her own name for a Friday night, requesting to speak with the kitchen staff after service. This time, instead of dreading the encounter, I was curious about what she wanted to say. After the last table had been served and the kitchen cleaned, I walked into the dining room where Victoria sat waiting with a glass of wine and her ever-present leather journal. "Chef Rodriguez," she said, standing to shake my hand. "Congratulations on the review. You must be pleased with the response." "Thank you. We've been busy, which is always a good problem to have." "I wanted to talk to you about something," she said, gesturing for me to sit across from her. "I've been thinking about our first meeting at the Thompson Digital Potluck last year." My stomach dropped. She did remember. "I recognized you that first night I came in for the review, but I wasn't sure if you'd remember me." Looking back at my comments that day, I realized they were unnecessarily harsh. "You were honest about what you tasted," I said carefully. "I was brutal about what I tasted, and there's a difference." "Maya. May I call you Maya?" I've been writing about food for 15 years, and somewhere along the way, I forgot that behind every dish is a person who cares about cooking. I focused so much on identifying flaws that I stopped recognizing effort and potential. She paused, sipping her wine before continuing. "Your lasagna that day wasn't perfect." The technique needed work, and the seasoning was inconsistent. But it was made with care and ambition, and instead of encouraging that, I dismissed it. I dismissed you. I wasn't sure how to respond. The woman who'd nearly destroyed my confidence was apologizing for an incident I'd spent months learning to see as a blessing in disguise. Victoria, if you hadn't said what you said that day, I might never have left my corporate job to work in a restaurant. In a strange way, you helped me find my calling. That's generous of you to say, but it doesn't excuse my behavior. I've been thinking about this a lot since I started following your career. You've become an exceptional chef not because of what I said, but despite it. That suggests a level of resilience and talent that I completely missed. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. I'm starting a mentorship program for young chefs, people who show promise but need guidance navigating the industry. I'd like you to be one of my first participants. The irony was almost too much to process. Victoria Ashford, whose critique had nearly ended my culinary dreams, was now offering to mentor my career. I'm honored, I said, accepting the card, but I'm not sure I need mentorship at this point. I have a great team, a supportive owner, and a restaurant that's doing well. Maya, you're talented enough to go much further than copper and time, as much as I'm sure Marcus would hate to hear me say that. You could open your own place, compete for James Beard Awards, build a culinary empire if that's what interests you. I'd like to help you explore those possibilities. I looked around the dining room of Copper and Time, at the tables where I'd watched customers enjoy my food, at the open kitchen, where my team was finishing their cleaning duties, with the kind of easy camaraderie that comes from working well together. Can I think about it? Of course. But Maya, don't let comfort keep you from pursuing greatness. You have a gift that deserves to be shared with more people than one restaurant can serve. After Victoria left, I sat alone in the empty dining room thinking about her offer and what it represented. The critic who'd once demolished my confidence now believed I had the potential for culinary stardom. It was validation beyond anything I'd ever imagined. But it was also a reminder that external opinions, positive or negative, couldn't define my worth as a chef or a person. Whether Victoria Ashford praised me or dismissed me, my job was to keep growing, keep learning, and keep serving food that mattered to the people who trusted me to cook for them. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the pictures from our most recent service. Sophie plating appetizers with artistic precision. James perfecting a new sauce technique. Emma training a new cook with the same patience Sophie had shown me. This was my kitchen, my team, my responsibility. Maybe someday I'd be ready to take Victoria's advice and pursue something larger. But for now, I was exactly where I belonged. In a kitchen where every night brought new challenges and new opportunities to prove that good cooking comes from passion, persistence, and the willingness to keep learning from both failures and successes. The next morning, I arrived at Copper and Time early to prep for another busy weekend. The familiar sounds of the awakening kitchen welcomed me like an old friend. Sophie was already there, starting the day's bread dough, and she looked up with a smile when I walked in. Ready for another crazy Saturday night? She asked. Always, I said, tying my apron and checking the prep list for the day ahead. As I sharpened my knives and began breaking down the cases of fresh ingredients that would become tonight's specials, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this moment. From data analyst to line cook to head chef in less than a year. From someone whose confidence was shattered by a food critic's harsh words, to someone whose cooking that same critic now praised in national publications. The transformation hadn't been easy, and it certainly hadn't been predictable. But it had been real, built on thousands of small moments of growth, supported by people who believed in my potential, even when I didn't believe in it myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Saw the review in Portland Monthly, Mom's framing it for the refrigerator. Proud of you, sis. I smiled, slipping the phone back into my pocket as the rest of the kitchen staff began arriving for another day of service. Whatever came next in my culinary career, I knew I'd built something solid here. Skills, relationships, and the kind of confidence that comes from proving yourself one plate at a time. The first orders of the day were already printing when I realized that Victoria Ashford's business card was still in my pocket, her offer of mentorship and bigger opportunities waiting for my response. But that was a decision for another day. Right now, I had a kitchen to run, a team to lead, and customers to feed. Right now, I was exactly the chef I'd always dreamed of becoming, and that was enough. "Behind hot," called James, carrying a pan of searing proteins past my station. "Heard," I responded automatically, the language of professional kitchens, as natural to me now as breathing. This was my world. This was my calling. And whether Victoria Ashford remembered me from a disastrous potluck or knew me as Portland's newest rising chef, I was ready for whatever came next. 3 months passed before I finally called Victoria Ashford about her mentorship offer. 3 months of running Copper and Time with increasing confidence, of developing new dishes that pushed my creative boundaries, of watching my team grow into one of the most cohesive kitchen crews in Portland. The business card had lived in my wallet, a constant reminder of possibilities I wasn't sure I was ready to explore. The call came on a particularly challenging Tuesday when our walk-in cooler had broken down during the night, forcing us to relocate thousands of dollars worth of ingredients to backup refrigeration, while emergency repair technicians worked to fix the problem. It was the kind of crisis that tested every aspect of kitchen management, from logistics to team morale to creative problem solving. I'd spent the morning coordinating with vendors, adjusting prep schedules, and reassuring staff that we'd still be able to execute dinner service despite the chaos. By afternoon, the cooler was humming again, the ingredients were safely stored, and the team was back to their normal routines. But the incident had reminded me how much I'd grown as a leader, how naturally I now handled the kind of emergency that would have paralyzed me a year earlier. That evening after service, I sat in my office looking at Victoria's card and finally dialed her number. "Maya?" she said, answering on the second ring. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I've been thinking about your offer, the mentorship program, the possibilities you mentioned. I'm interested, but I have questions. I'm glad you called. Why don't we meet for coffee tomorrow afternoon? I can explain what I have in mind, and you can decide if it's something that fits your goals." We met at a quiet cafe in the Pearl District, far enough from Copper and Time that we wouldn't be interrupted by industry colleagues or curious customers. Victoria looked different outside the formal setting of restaurant reviewing, more approachable, less intimidating than the woman who'd once demolished my confidence with a few cutting observations. "Before we talk about the future," she began, stirring honey into her tea, "I want to address the past more directly. Maya, I owe you a genuine apology for what happened at that potluck. Not just because you've succeeded despite my comments, but because my behavior was unprofessional and unnecessarily cruel. Victoria, we've already discussed this. In some ways, that day changed my life for the better. But that doesn't make it right. I've been reflecting on my role as a critic, and I've realized that I've spent too many years focusing on what's wrong with food, instead of recognizing what's right with the people who prepare it. You were clearly passionate about cooking, clearly trying to improve, and I dismissed all of that because your technique wasn't perfect." She paused, looking out the window at the busy street. "I've decided to change how I approach my work. Instead of just reviewing established restaurants, I want to help promising cooks like you navigate the industry and reach their potential. That's what this mentorship program is about." "What would that look like, practically speaking?" "Several things. First, I'd help you build relationships with investors and restaurant developers who could support your own venture when you're ready. Second, I'd provide guidance on media relationships, cookbook opportunities, and building a personal brand that extends beyond one restaurant. Third, I'd connect you with other chefs who could teach you aspects of the business you haven't encountered yet." The scope of what she was describing was both exciting and overwhelming. "Victoria, I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure I'm ready to leave Copper and Time. Marcus took a chance on me when I was nobody, and my team depends on the stability I provide. I'm not suggesting you leave immediately. But Maya, you're 29 years old with the kind of natural talent that most chefs spend decades trying to develop. If you wait too long to pursue your own vision, you might find that the window of opportunity has closed." She pulled out a folder from her purse and slid it across the table. "These are profiles of 3 restaurant spaces that are coming available in the next 6 months. Prime locations, reasonable lease terms, the kind of opportunities that don't stay on the market long." I opened the folder reluctantly, not wanting to be tempted by possibilities I wasn't ready to consider. But the properties were stunning. A converted warehouse in the Alberta Arts District, a historic building in the Hawthorne neighborhood, a modern space in the south waterfront with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. The Alberta space would be perfect for the kind of neighborhood restaurant you've proven you can run, Victoria continued. 50 seats, open kitchen, room for expansion if the concept succeeds. The owner is looking for an established chef with local credibility. How much are we talking about? Initial investment of around $300,000, including build-out, equipment, and operating capital for the first 6 months. I have contacts who'd be interested in backing the right chef. $300,000. The number was both smaller and larger than I'd expected. Smaller than the million-dollar investments I'd imagined restaurant ownership required, but larger than anything I could personally finance. Victoria, even if I wanted to do this, I don't have that kind of money. That's what investors are for. Maya, you've proven you can run a profitable kitchen. You've received critical acclaim, and you have the kind of authentic culinary voice that resonates with diners. Those are exactly the qualities that make investors confident. They'll see a return on their money. I spent the rest of our meeting asking practical questions about restaurant ownership, lease negotiations, equipment purchases, staffing challenges, marketing strategies. Victoria had clearly done her research, and her answers were detailed and realistic about both the opportunities and the risks. I need time to think about this, I said as we prepared to leave. Of course. But Maya, don't think too long. These opportunities don't wait for perfect timing, and perfect timing never comes anyway. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, imagining what it would be like to design my own menu, create my own atmosphere, build my own team from scratch. The freedom to pursue every creative impulse, to take risks without needing approval, to succeed or fail based entirely on my own vision. But I also thought about the responsibility I'd built at Copper and Time. Sophie, who'd become not just a colleague but a close friend. James, whose knife skills had improved dramatically under my guidance. Emma, who was ready for promotion to a more senior role. Marcus, who'd believed in me when nobody else would. Could I abandon all of that for the uncertainty of entrepreneurship? I called Danny the next morning, needing to talk through the decision with someone who knew me well enough to be brutally honest. Maya, this is incredible. Your own restaurant? Your name on the door? This is what you've always dreamed about. Is it, though? I mean, I dreamed about being a chef, and I am one. I dreamed about running a kitchen, and I do. Maybe I already have everything I wanted. Or maybe you're scared of taking the next big step. His words stung because they contained truth I wasn't ready to acknowledge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The smell of burnt garlic still haunts my nightmares. Not because I burned it, because Victoria Ashford, the most feared food critic in Portland, made sure everyone at that company, Potluck, knew exactly what she thought of my homemade lasagna. Her voice, sharp as a cleaver, cut through the cheerful chatter of my coworkers like she was dissecting roadkill on live television. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Who made this? She demanded, holding up a forkful of my carefully layered pasta like it was evidence in a murder trial. Because whoever did this clearly doesn't understand the first thing about Italian cuisine. The bechamel is broken, the seasoning is amateur at best, and don't get me started on this tragic excuse for a meat sauce. Every conversation in the break room stopped. 43 people turned to stare, as I felt my face burn hotter than the oven I'd spent 3 hours slaving over the night before. Victoria Ashford, the woman whose reviews could close restaurants overnight, whose palate was supposedly so refined she could taste the emotional state of the person who prepared her food, was systematically destroying my confidence one brutal observation at a time. I'm sorry, I managed to whisper, raising my hand slightly. That's mine. Her perfectly manicured eyebrow arched with predatory delight. Yours? Well, darling, might I suggest sticking to ordering takeout? Some people are born to cook. Others are born to, well, do whatever it is you actually do here. The laughter that followed wasn't malicious. My coworkers weren't cruel people, but it stung all the same. 28 years old, working as a data analyst for a tech company, and my secret dream of opening my own restaurant had just been publicly executed by Portland's most influential food critic. The same woman I'd been reading religiously for 5 years, whose approval I'd fantasized about earning someday when I finally worked up the courage to leave my cubicle behind. The humiliation at Thomson Digital's annual Potluck happened on a Tuesday. By Thursday, I was seriously considering transferring to our Seattle office just to escape the pitying looks and the way conversations died when I walked past. Victoria Ashford's critique had spread through the office like wildfire, and somehow it had gotten worse in the retelling. According to the version making rounds by the water cooler, she'd actually spit out my food and declared it an assault on Italian heritage. That wasn't exactly what happened, but the truth rarely survives office gossip intact. I'd been cooking since I was 12, when my mom went back to nursing school and left me responsible for feeding my younger brother Danny while she worked nights. What started as necessity became passion. I devoured cooking shows, saved every penny for better ingredients, and spent weekends experimenting with flavors the way other kids played video games. My tiny apartment kitchen became my laboratory, my sanctuary, my happy place. The lasagna that Victoria had so thoroughly demolished had taken me 6 months to perfect. 6 months of testing different meat ratios, adjusting seasoning, experimenting with cheese blends. I'd served it to friends who'd raved about it, to my brother who'd asked for the recipe, to dates who'd insisted I should open a restaurant. But Victoria Ashford had seen through all of that in one bite, exposing me as the fraud I'd apparently always been. The worst part wasn't even the public humiliation. It was the doubt that crept in afterward, poisoning everything I'd built my dreams on. Had I been delusional this whole time? Were my friends just being nice? Was Danny just being a good brother? Had I wasted 10 years practicing techniques and perfecting recipes when I should have been focusing on climbing the corporate ladder like every other sensible person my age? Friday afternoon, I was staring blankly at spreadsheets when my phone buzzed with a text from Danny. Heard what happened. You cooking tonight? I'm bringing beer. My brother had always been my most honest critic and my biggest supporter, somehow managing both roles without contradiction. If anyone could help me figure out whether to laugh this off or start looking for a new career, it was him. I stopped at Pike Place Market on my way home, drawn by habit to the vendors I'd been buying from for years. Maria at the produce stand greeted me with her usual warm smile, but I caught her studying my face with concern. You look tired, Mija. Everything okay? Just a rough week, I said, selecting tomatoes for a simple pasta sauce. Nothing fancy tonight. Nothing that could be critiqued or dissected or held up as evidence of my culinary incompetence. You know, Maria said, carefully wrapping my tomatoes in brown paper, my nephew works at Copper and Time downtown. That fancy place with the waiting list? He says they've been through 3 head chefs this year. Good cooks are hard to find. I forced a smile. Thanks, but I think I'm done pretending I can cook. She handed me my change with a look that reminded me of my grandmother. Pretending and practicing aren't the same thing, Mija. Don't let one person's opinion erase years of your own work. But that was exactly the problem. It wasn't just anyone's opinion. It was Victoria Ashford's, the woman who'd discovered half the celebrity chefs on Food Network. The critic whose review had turned Lucia's Bistro from a neighborhood joint into a reservation impossible destination. When Victoria Ashford said you couldn't cook, the conversation was over. Danny arrived at 7 with a 6-pack of local IPA and his usual brutal honesty. So the Ice Queen finally met someone she couldn't intimidate with her fancy vocabulary, he said, twisting off a bottle cap. Good for her. Danny, she wasn't wrong. Maybe I've been fooling myself this whole time. He took a long drink, studying me across my small kitchen island. You remember when I broke my leg senior year? Couldn't play baseball anymore? Of course. You were devastated. Coach Miller told me I'd never been that good anyway. Said maybe the injury was doing me a favor, saving me from embarrassing myself at state championships. You know what you told me? I shook my head, stirring the pasta sauce that smelled like garlic and fresh basil and everything I'd ever loved about cooking. You said Coach Miller was a bitter old man who'd never made it past high school ball himself, and that his opinion said more about him than it did about me. You drove me to physical therapy every day for 4 months. You helped me prove him wrong. That's different. You actually were good at baseball. And you actually are good at cooking. Remember Jenny's birthday last month? She called me the next day to get your recipe for that chocolate tart. She wanted to serve it at her anniversary dinner because her husband couldn't stop talking about it. I'd forgotten about that. Jenny from accounting, who'd insisted on taking pictures of the dessert before anyone could cut into it. Who'd texted me a week later asking if I did catering for small parties. One person's opinion, Maya. Even if that person thinks she's the queen of taste buds. You've been feeding people who love your food for years. Don't let her take that away from you. We ate the simple pasta in comfortable silence, the sauce bright with summer tomatoes and fresh herbs from my tiny balcony garden. It was good. Not restaurant quality, maybe, but honest and satisfying in the way that mattered most, the way food should be when it's made with care instead of ego. After Danny left, I found myself scrolling through Victoria Ashford's recent reviews on my laptop. Her writing was undeniably sharp, her descriptions vivid and precise. She'd given 5 stars to a molecular gastronomy place that served foam where sauce should be, and had destroyed a family-owned taco truck for using quote, pedestrian spice blends. Her palate might have been educated, but her heart seemed to have been surgically removed. I was about to close the laptop when I noticed something odd. 3 restaurants she'd reviewed in the past 6 months had quietly closed down shortly afterward. Not because of poor business. These were established places with loyal followings. They'd closed because the owners had lost confidence, sold out, or simply couldn't handle the pressure of her public evisceration. Maybe Maria at the market was right. Maybe good cooks really were harder to find than critics who built careers on tearing them down. The weekend passed quietly. I meal prepped for the week, making simple dishes that wouldn't attract attention or inspire commentary. Grilled chicken, roasted vegetables, brown rice. Food as fuel rather than art. It felt safe, but also hollow, like I was betraying something essential about who I'd always been. Monday morning brought an unexpected email. The subject line read, Copper and Time, Kitchen Position Inquiry, and the sender was someone named Marcus Chen. I almost deleted it, assuming it was spam, but curiosity got the better of me. Ms. Rodriguez, your name came up in conversation regarding potential kitchen staff. Would you be available for a brief phone call this week to discuss an opportunity? We're looking for someone with fresh ideas and genuine passion for food. My first instinct was to delete it. Whoever had recommended me clearly hadn't heard about the Potluck incident, and I wasn't interested in subjecting myself to professional humiliation on top of personal embarrassment. But something about the phrase genuine passion for food made me hesitate. When was the last time anyone had described my cooking in terms of passion instead of amateur mistakes? I spent the entire day debating whether to respond. Copper and Time was exactly the kind of restaurant I dreamed of working in. Small enough to matter, established enough to be respected, creative enough to push boundaries. It was also completely out of my league, especially now that Victoria Ashford had publicly declared my cooking unworthy of human consumption. By Tuesday evening, I'd convinced myself that responding couldn't hurt. Worst case scenario, they'd politely decline after a brief conversation. Best case scenario, maybe I'd learn something about the professional kitchen world that would help me understand where I'd gone wrong. Marcus Chen speaking. His voice was calm, professional, but not intimidating. I introduced myself, explained that I'd received his email, and waited for him to realize he'd made a mistake. Maya Rodriguez. Yes, thank you for calling. I'm the general manager at Copper and Time, and I've been hearing interesting things about your cooking. I'm sorry, but I think there might be some confusion. I'm not a professional chef. I work in data analysis, and honestly, I'm not even sure I'm a very good cook. Someone recently made that pretty clear to me. Marcus chuckled. Let me guess. Victoria Ashford? The surprise in my voice was audible. How did you know? Because she's made that pretty clear to a lot of talented people. The woman has exquisite taste and zero understanding of what it takes to actually run a kitchen. She can identify problems, but she's never had to solve them under pressure while managing food costs and staff schedules. She wasn't wrong, though. My technique needs work. My seasoning was off. Maya, can I stop you right there? I've heard about the potluck incident from 3 different people, and every single one of them mentioned how disappointed they were that Victoria shut down someone who'd clearly put love and effort into their cooking. That tells me something about your food that her critique doesn't. I found myself gripping the phone tighter. What does it tell you? That you cook for the right reasons. Look, we've been through 3 head chefs this year. Technically brilliant, all of them. Perfect knife skills, impeccable presentations, could execute any dish you put in front of them. But they couldn't lead a team, couldn't adapt when things went wrong, and couldn't create food that made people feel anything beyond impressed. I'm confused. Are you offering me a job interview? I'm offering you a stage. One night in our kitchen, working alongside our current team. No pressure, no commitment from either side. Just a chance to see if there's something there worth exploring. My hands were shaking now. Marcus, I appreciate this, but I really don't think. Thursday night, 7 p.m. Wear comfortable shoes and bring a positive attitude. Everything else we can figure out together. He hung up before I could protest further, leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. A stage at Copper and Time. The restaurant that had been written up in Food and Wine magazine. The place where reservations were booked solid for 2 months out. The kitchen that had somehow gone through 3 head chefs in 1 year, all of whom were probably more qualified than I'd ever be. I called Danny immediately. "You're going," he said before I could even finish explaining the situation. "Danny, I can't. What if I mess up? What if I prove Victoria Ashford right in front of actual professionals? Then you'll learn something. But Maya, what if you don't mess up? What if you discover that your food means something to people, even if it doesn't impress critics? I don't have the experience. I don't have formal training. I don't even have proper kitchen knives. You have something better. You have 10 years of cooking because you love it, not because someone told you to. That has to count for something." Wednesday night, I barely slept. I researched Copper and Time's menu, studied their presentation style, tried to imagine what Marcus Chen might expect from me. Their food was sophisticated but approachable, creative but grounded in classical techniques. Everything I aspired to but had never achieved. Thursday afternoon, I left work early and stopped by Williams-Sonoma to buy a decent chef's knife. $200 I couldn't really afford, but if I was going to embarrass myself, at least I'd do it with proper equipment. The salesperson, a culinary school graduate working retail while looking for kitchen jobs, spent 20 minutes teaching me proper grip and cutting techniques. "First time in a professional kitchen?" she asked, wrapping the knife carefully. "Is it that obvious?" "Just nervous energy, but you've got good instincts. I can tell by how you hold the knife. Trust yourself tonight. Most people who stage are overthinking everything instead of just cooking." At 6:30, I stood outside Copper and Time, trying to work up the courage to walk through the back entrance. The restaurant occupied a converted warehouse in the Pearl District, all exposed brick and industrial lighting softened by warm wood accents. Through the windows, I could see the dining room filling up with the kind of people who knew good food when they tasted it. The kitchen entrance was unmarked, just a heavy steel door beside the loading dock. I knocked, and it swung open to reveal a woman about my age in chef's whites, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, flour dusting her forearms. "You must be Maya. I'm Sophie, sous chef. Marcus is in the office, but he said to get you started on prep." The kitchen was smaller than I'd expected, but beautifully organized, every surface spotless steel reflecting the overhead lights. The controlled chaos was immediately familiar. The sizzle of sauté pans, the rhythmic chopping of knife work, the quiet intensity of people who took their craft seriously. Sophie handed me an apron and led me to a prep station loaded with vegetables. "We need brunoise on these carrots, julienne on the bell peppers, and the herbs need to be picked and chopped fine. Think you can handle that?" My hands were trembling slightly as I began the mise en place, but the familiar rhythm of knife work calmed my nerves. Cooking had always been meditative for me, a way to focus completely on the present moment. Even here, surrounded by professional cooks who could probably prep vegetables in their sleep, the simple act of cutting carrots felt like coming home. "Nice knife work," Sophie said, checking my progress 20 minutes later. Where did you stage before this? I haven't. I mean, this is my first time in a professional kitchen. She looked genuinely surprised. Really? Your cuts are clean, your technique is solid. Most culinary school grads don't have this kind of consistency. I've been cooking at home for years, just never professionally. Huh. Well, you're doing great. Marcus wants to see you on the line during service. Think you're ready for that? Service. The dinner rush. The time when every mistake gets magnified, every weakness exposed, every moment of hesitation potentially disastrous. I'd watched enough cooking shows to know that professional kitchens during service were pressure cookers that could break even experienced cooks. I'll try, I said, which was the most honest answer I could give. Marcus appeared as if summoned, a lean man in his 40s with kind eyes, and the calm presence of someone who'd spent years managing chaos. Maya, how are you feeling? Terrified, I admitted. He laughed. Good. Fear keeps you focused. Sophie says your prep work is solid, so let's see how you handle the real thing. You'll be working salads and cold appetizers tonight. Follow Emma's lead, ask questions if you're confused, and remember that everyone here wants you to succeed. Emma turned out to be a recent culinary school graduate working her way up from garde manger, and she had the kind of efficient energy that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be done and when. She walked me through each salad composition, explained the plating standards, and showed me where everything was located in the cramped cold station. The key is consistency, she said, assembling a beet and goat cheese salad with practiced precision. Every plate needs to look identical, every portion needs to be exact. Customers expect that, and Marcus absolutely requires it. The first tickets started printing at 7:15. Simple orders: 2 Caesar salads, 1 beet salad, 3 orders of the burrata appetizer. Emma called out each component while I scrambled to keep up, my movements clumsy but determined. The plates went out on time, and Marcus gave me an encouraging nod from the pass. By 8 o'clock, the orders were coming faster. The printer seemed to run continuously, spitting out tickets faster than I could read them. Emma maintained her rhythm, calling out instructions while assembling plates with mechanical precision, but I was falling behind. Maya, I need 2 Caesars, 1 without anchovies, extra croutons on both, Emma called, already starting the beet salads for the next ticket. My hands moved automatically, building the salads I'd made 100 times at home but never under this kind of pressure. The romaine was crisp, the dressing properly emulsified, the parmesan freshly grated. They looked exactly like Emma's, which felt like a small victory until I realized I'd forgotten the extra croutons on one of them. Behind, someone called, and I pressed myself against the wall as a line cook rushed past, carrying a hotel pan of searing hot proteins. The kitchen was a ballet of controlled movement, everyone knowing exactly where to be and when to be there. Except me. Maya, focus, Emma said gently, fixing my crouton mistake before the plates hit the pass. You're doing fine, just trust your instincts. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of mixed greens, vinaigrettes, and carefully arranged garnishes. My back ached from bending over plates, my feet burned in shoes that weren't meant for standing on concrete all night, and my hands moved with increasing confidence as muscle memory took over. This was cooking stripped of ego and pretension, just the simple, honest work of feeding people well. Around 10:30, the tickets finally slowed down. Emma began breaking down the cold station while I cleaned my prep area, trying to process what had just happened. I'd survived my first professional service. Nothing had been sent back, no plates had been dropped, no customers had complained. I'd been a small part of something larger than myself, contributing to an experience that brought people together over good food. Marcus appeared as I was washing my knives. How do you feel? Exhausted, exhilarated, like I just ran a marathon. That's service. Every night, 5 days a week. Think you could handle that? I looked around the kitchen. The controlled chaos winding down. The satisfied tiredness on everyone's faces. The sense of shared accomplishment that comes from executing a plan under pressure. This was everything I'd dreamed of, and everything that scared me about professional cooking. I think I'd like to try, I said. Marcus smiled. Good, because I'd like to offer you a position. Not head chef, that comes with experience, but a real spot on the line, working your way up the way it should be done. What do you say? The words hung in the air between us like an impossible offer. A real job in a real kitchen, cooking food that mattered to people who cared about quality. Everything Victoria Ashford had tried to take away from me with her cutting critique, offered back by people who understood that cooking was about more than perfect technique. What about my lack of experience? My amateur mistakes? Maya, I watched you work tonight. You made mistakes, sure, but you learned from them. You adjusted, you improved, you kept going when things got overwhelming. That's not amateur, that's professional. I thought about my cubicle at Thomson Digital, the spreadsheets and data analysis that paid my bills but never fed my soul. I thought about Victoria Ashford's dismissive voice, the laughter at the potluck, the way her critique had made me question everything I'd built my dreams on. And I thought about the past 4 hours, moving with purpose and passion in a kitchen that felt more like home than anywhere I'd ever worked. When do I start? Monday night. Welcome to Copper and Time, Maya. I have a feeling this is going to be the beginning of something special. As I walked to my car that night, still wearing my borrowed apron, I felt something I hadn't experienced since that Tuesday potluck disaster. Hope. Maybe Victoria Ashford had been wrong about me. Maybe her opinion, no matter how educated or influential, was just one voice in a much larger conversation about what it meant to cook with heart. Or maybe I was about to discover that one night of beginner's luck didn't prepare me for the real challenges of professional cooking. Either way, I was finally ready to find out. The city lights blurred past my windshield as I drove home, my hands still smelling like garlic and fresh herbs, my mind already racing ahead to Monday night and whatever came next. For the first time in weeks, I was excited about cooking again. Victoria Ashford could keep her perfect palate and cutting reviews. I had found something better. A place where effort mattered more than expertise, where passion counted for something, and where maybe, just maybe, I could prove that good food comes from the heart, not from the opinions of critics who build careers on tearing people down. The real test was just beginning. My first official shift at Copper and Time began at 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, with what Sophie diplomatically called orientation, and what I quickly realized was a baptism by fire. The restaurant industry doesn't ease you into anything. You either sink or swim from the moment you tie your apron strings. Maya, today you're working pantry full-time, Sophie announced, handing me a laminated card covered in abbreviations and numbers that might as well have been hieroglyphics. This is your cheat sheet for portion sizes, plating specs, and ticket timing. Memorize it by the end of the week. The pantry station was responsible for all cold appetizers, salads, and dessert plating. It seemed straightforward enough until the first dinner ticket printed, and I realized that simple, in a professional kitchen, meant executing 15 different components flawlessly, while 3 other orders waited behind it. Emma had been promoted to work the hotline, leaving me to figure out the cold station largely on my own. The other cooks were friendly but busy, and I quickly learned that asking too many questions during prep time marked you as someone who couldn't handle the pressure. My knife skills, which had impressed Sophie during staging, felt clumsy and slow compared to the machine-like precision of my colleagues. While I struggled to julienne enough vegetables for the evening's mise en place, the cook next to me prepped twice as much in half the time, his blade moving in a rhythm that seemed almost musical. "You'll get faster," said James, the guard manger who'd been working cold appetizers for 2 years before I took over his station. "Just keep your knife sharp and trust your muscle memory. Speed comes with repetition." But speed wasn't my only problem. Professional cooking demanded a level of multitasking that my home kitchen experience hadn't prepared me for. At home, I could focus on one dish at a time, tasting and adjusting until everything was perfect. Here, I needed to plate 4 different salads simultaneously, while keeping track of cooking times for warm appetizers, and remembering which tables had specific dietary restrictions. The first week was a disaster disguised as learning. I sent out a Caesar salad with the wrong dressing, forgot to remove tomatoes from an order marked with an allergy, and somehow managed to plate a beet salad so unevenly that Marcus had to remake it himself before it could leave the pass. "Maya," he said after that particularly embarrassing mistake, his voice calm but firm. "Take a breath. You're trying so hard to be perfect that you're forgetting to be present. Cooking is about rhythm, not panic. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one sweating through chef's whites, while more experienced cooks watched him struggle with tasks they could execute blindfolded. I'd left a stable job with predictable challenges for this chaos, and some nights I wondered if Victoria Ashford had been right about my limitations all along. The breakthrough came during my third week, on a particularly brutal Saturday night when we were fully booked and running behind on every station. The printer was churning out tickets faster than I'd ever seen, and Sophie was calling out orders with military precision while the kitchen moved like a well-oiled machine around me. I was plating my 7th burrata appetizer of the night when I realized something had shifted. My hands were moving without conscious thought, portioning the creamy cheese, arranging the heirloom tomatoes, drizzling the basil oil in a perfect spiral. The chaos around me had become background noise, and for the first time since starting at Copper and Time, I felt like I belonged. "Nice work, Maya," Sophie called from the pass, and I caught the surprise in her voice. "Your plating's getting consistent." Consistent. In a professional kitchen, that was the highest compliment you could receive. Not creative, not inspired, but consistent, the foundation that everything else was built on. By my 4th week, I was keeping pace with the dinner rush, and even helping other stations when they fell behind. The other cooks started including me in their pre-shift jokes and post-service wind-down conversations. I was becoming part of the team, earning my place through competence rather than charity. That's when Victoria Ashford walked into my life again. It was a Tuesday night, typically quiet, when Marcus appeared at my station looking unusually tense. "Maya, I need to talk to you privately." He led me to the small office behind the kitchen, closing the door with the kind of care that suggested bad news was coming. Victoria Ashford made a reservation for Thursday night. My stomach dropped. "She's coming here?" "Foretop, prime seating, her usual table by the window." She specifically requested to speak with the kitchen staff after service. "Marcus, I can't. What if she recognizes me? What if she says something about the potluck incident in front of everyone?" He leaned back in his chair, studying my face with the same calm attention he gave to plating presentations. "Maya, you've been here a month. You've gone from struggling with basic prep to handling our busiest stations. Do you think Victoria Ashford's opinion matters more than the work you've done every single night? It's not about her opinion. It's about what happens if she decides to write about this place and mentions that you hired the woman she publicly humiliated for her terrible cooking. Then she mentions it. Maya, I've been in this business for 15 years. Critics come and go, but good cooks are irreplaceable. You've earned your spot here. But earning my spot and feeling confident about it were two different things. For the next 2 days, I obsessed over every dish that left my station, convinced that somehow Victoria would sense my presence in the food and launch another attack on my competence. Thursday night arrived with the weight of inevitable disaster. I arrived early, double-checked all my mise en place, and tried to convince myself that Victoria probably wouldn't even remember me. After all, how many aspiring home cooks had she encountered over the years? Surely one disastrous potluck wouldn't stick in her memory. At 7:30, she walked through the front door like she owned the place. Victoria Ashford, in her natural habitat, was even more intimidating than she'd been at the office potluck. She wore a perfectly tailored black dress and carried herself with the confidence of someone whose opinion could make or break careers. Her dining companions looked equally sophisticated, the kind of people who could identify every ingredient in a dish just by smell. From my position at the cold station, I could see her table clearly through the kitchen's pass-through window. She studied the menu with the same intensity she'd probably used to dissect my lasagna, making notes in a small leather journal that I assumed contained the death sentences of Portland's culinary scene. "Relax," Sophie said, appearing beside me with a reassuring hand on my shoulder. She orders the same thing every time she comes in. Crudo to start, duck breast medium rare, no modifications. She's predictable. But predictable didn't mean harmless. As the evening progressed, I watched Victoria taste each course with the methodical precision of a scientist conducting experiments. She chewed slowly, paused to write notes, and occasionally made comments to her companions that I couldn't hear but could see were being received with rapt attention. The dinner service passed without incident. Victoria's table received the same flawless execution that every table received, and from what I could observe, she seemed satisfied with her meal. No dishes were sent back. No servers were summoned for complaints. No dramatic scenes played out in the dining room. At 10:15, as we were breaking down our stations, Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway. She wants to meet the kitchen staff. Everyone to the dining room in 5 minutes. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading since Marcus first told me about her reservation. I untied my apron with hands that trembled slightly, wiped the sweat from my forehead, and followed my colleagues into the dining room where Victoria Ashford sat waiting like a queen holding court. "Excellent meal tonight," she began, her voice carrying the same authority that had demolished my confidence weeks earlier. "I wanted to compliment the kitchen personally." She went around the table, shaking hands with each cook, asking about their backgrounds and specialties. Sophie introduced everyone by name and station, and Victoria nodded with polite interest until Sophie reached me. "This is Maya Rodriguez, our pantry cook. She's been with us about a month now." Victoria's eyes met mine, and I held my breath waiting for recognition to dawn, for her to remember the woman whose lasagna she'd eviscerated, whose culinary dreams she'd nearly destroyed with a few cutting observations. Instead, she smiled and extended her hand. "Maya, lovely to meet you. That crudo appetizer was exceptional tonight. The fish was perfectly cut, and the citrus balance was spot on. How long have you been working in professional kitchens?" "This is actually my first restaurant job," I managed to say, accepting her handshake. "Really? Your knife work suggests much more experience. Have you considered specializing in raw preparations? You have a natural touch for it." I stared at her, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for her to remember who I was and where she'd encountered my cooking before. But there was no recognition in her eyes, no flash of memory connecting me to that humiliating Tuesday afternoon. "Thank you," I said finally. "I appreciate that." Victoria moved on to the next cook, leaving me standing there in a state of confused relief. She didn't remember me. The potluck incident that had haunted my thoughts for weeks, that had nearly convinced me to give up cooking entirely, was apparently so forgettable that Portland's most feared food critic had no recollection of it happening. After Victoria and her party left, the kitchen staff gathered for our usual post-service breakdown. The mood was celebratory. Getting praise from Victoria Ashford was like receiving a blessing from the culinary gods. "Maya, did you hear what she said about your crudo?" Emma asked, still glowing from Victoria's compliment about her sauce work. She almost never singles out individual dishes like that. "It was just a standard preparation," I said, though privately I was still processing the encounter. "No, it wasn't," Marcus interjected. "Your knife cuts have gotten incredibly precise, and you've developed an instinct for seasoning that can't be taught." Victoria noticed that because she knows what to look for. Later that night, alone in my apartment, I reflected on the strange turn my life had taken. The woman whose criticism had nearly destroyed my confidence had just praised my professional cooking without any idea that she'd previously dismissed me as hopeless. The disconnect was almost surreal. But more importantly, I realized that Victoria's opinion, positive or negative, didn't define my worth as a cook. The work I'd done over the past month, the skills I'd developed, the respect I'd earned from my colleagues, those things existed independently of any critic's assessment. The next few weeks brought new challenges, as Marcus began giving me more responsibility. I started working some hot appetizers, learning to coordinate multiple cooking methods, while maintaining the speed and precision that professional service demanded. The burns on my arms became badges of honor, evidence that I was pushing myself beyond the safe boundaries of cold preparations. My confidence grew with each successful service, each dish that left the pass without modification, each night that I kept pace with cooks who'd been doing this for years. I was becoming the professional chef I'd always dreamed of being, one service at a time. Then came the news that changed everything. It was a quiet Wednesday afternoon when Marcus called a staff meeting. The entire kitchen crew gathered around the stainless steel prep table, and I could tell from his expression that something significant was happening. "I wanted you all to hear this from me first," he began. "Chef Harrison gave his notice yesterday. He's accepted a position in San Francisco, and his last day will be next Friday." Chef Harrison was our head chef, the creative force behind Copper and Time's menu, and the leader who'd guided our kitchen through some of the busiest services I'd ever experienced. Losing him felt like losing the captain of a ship in the middle of a storm. What does that mean for the rest of us? Sophie asked, voicing what everyone was thinking. It means we have some decisions to make, Marcus replied. I'll be interviewing candidates over the next few weeks, but in the meantime, we need to maintain our standards and keep the restaurant running smoothly. The meeting dissolved into worried conversations about the future. Head chef positions didn't grow on trees, especially for restaurants with Copper and Time's reputation. Finding someone who could maintain our quality while bringing their own vision to the menu would be challenging. That night, I stayed late to help with inventory, partly because the work needed to be done, and partly because I wanted to avoid going home to an empty apartment where I'd just worry about job security. Professional kitchens were notoriously unstable, and new head chefs often brought their own teams, leaving existing staff to find new positions. Maya, can I talk to you for a minute? Marcus appeared as I was finishing the walk-in cooler count. We sat in his office, the same space where he'd first offered me a job 6 weeks earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. How do you feel about your progress here? He asked. I feel like I'm finally starting to understand what professional cooking means. The pace, the precision, the teamwork. It's everything I hoped it would be. Good, because I want to ask you something and I need you to be completely honest with me. Do you see yourself staying in this industry long term? Yes, I said without hesitation. I know I still have a lot to learn, but this is what I want to do with my life. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. I've been watching you work, Maya. You've gone from struggling with basic prep to handling multiple stations during our busiest nights. But more than that, you've developed something that can't be taught: instinct. You taste as you go, you adjust seasoning without being told, you understand how flavors work together. I still make mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. The difference is that you learn from them instead of repeating them. That's what separates good cooks from great chefs. What are you getting at, Marcus? He leaned forward, his expression serious. I want you to consider applying for the head chef position. The words hung in the air like an impossible proposition. Me, a head chef? 6 weeks ago, I'd been a data analyst who cooked as a hobby. Now Marcus was suggesting I could lead a professional kitchen? Marcus, I appreciate the confidence, but I'm nowhere near qualified for that kind of responsibility. I've been cooking professionally for 6 weeks. Length of experience isn't the same as depth of understanding. You know this menu better than anyone except Chef Harrison himself. The other cooks respect you, customers love the food you send out, and you have the kind of natural palate that most chefs spend years trying to develop. But the business side, the menu development, the staff management, can all be learned. The things you can't learn: passion, instinct, the ability to taste what a dish needs. You already have those. I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. Are you seriously offering me the head chef position? I'm offering you the opportunity to interview for it, along with several other candidates. But Maya, I want you to know that if you're interested, you'd be my first choice. The drive home that night passed in a blur of possibility and terror. Head chef of Copper and Time, leading the kitchen that had become my second home, creating menus that would define the restaurant's future, taking responsibility for every dish that left the pass. It was everything I'd dreamed of, and everything that scared me about professional cooking. I called Danny as soon as I got home, needing to talk through the impossible choice I was facing. Let me get this straight, he said after I'd explained the situation. The guy who hired you 6 weeks ago wants to make you head chef of one of Portland's best restaurants. I know it sounds crazy. It sounds amazing. Maya, this is exactly what you've always wanted. What I've always wanted was to maybe work in a good restaurant someday. This is way beyond anything I imagined. So what's holding you back? I was quiet for a long moment, trying to identify the fear that was making this opportunity feel more like a burden than a blessing. What if I'm not ready? What if I fail and prove that Victoria Ashford was right about me all along? Maya, Victoria Ashford doesn't even remember you exist. She complimented your cooking 3 weeks ago without having any idea who you were. You're letting someone who forgot about you the moment she walked out of that potluck control your entire future. He was right, of course. The woman whose opinion had once seemed so devastating now felt like a distant memory, irrelevant to the chef I was becoming. Besides, Danny continued, what's the worst that could happen? You try something amazing and maybe it doesn't work out? At least you'll know you took the shot instead of wondering what might have been. The next morning, I asked Marcus for an application. The interview process was more intense than anything I'd experienced in the corporate world. I had to develop a sample menu, cost out ingredients, present my vision for the restaurant's future, and cook a tasting menu for a panel that included Marcus, the restaurant owner, and 2 established chefs from other Portland restaurants. For 2 weeks, I lived and breathed menu development. I researched seasonal ingredients, experimented with flavor combinations, and refined my presentation skills until every dish told a story about my approach to cooking. The night before my final interview, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed running through potential questions, rehearsing explanations for my menu choices, and trying to convince myself that I belonged in this conversation. At 3 a.m, I gave up on sleep and went to my kitchen to practice plating one more time. As I arranged microgreens and drizzled sauce with tweezers and squeeze bottles, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. 6 weeks ago, I'd been convinced that Victoria Ashford's Critic had exposed me as a fraud. Now I was preparing to interview for a position that would make me responsible for maintaining the standards of a restaurant that critics respected and customers loved. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. But somewhere between burning my fingers on sauté pans and learning to plate 4 different appetizers simultaneously, I'd become the chef I'd always had the potential to be. The interview was scheduled for 2 o'clock on a Thursday afternoon before the dinner prep began. I arrived early, wearing my best chef's whites and carrying a portfolio of menu ideas that represented everything I'd learned about cooking with heart and precision. Marcus met me at the back door with an encouraging smile. Ready for this? As ready as I'll ever be. Maya, remember, they asked you to interview because they believe you can do this job. Now you just need to show them why they're right. As we walked toward the dining room where the interview panel waited, I thought about all the moments that had led to this opportunity. The potluck disaster that had nearly convinced me to give up cooking. The stage that had proven I could handle professional pressure. The weeks of growth that had transformed me from an amateur with dreams into a cook with skills and confidence. Whatever happened in the next hour would determine whether I'd spend the next phase of my career leading a kitchen or looking for a new job. But regardless of the outcome, I knew I'd already won something more valuable than any position. I'd proven to myself that Victoria Ashford had been wrong about me. Not because her palate was flawed or her standards were too high, but because she'd judged me based on one moment instead of seeing my potential for growth. The dining room door opened, and I stepped inside to face the biggest opportunity of my culinary career. The interview panel sat at the restaurant's largest table, 3 faces studying me with the kind of professional assessment that could determine the next chapter of my career. Marcus offered encouraging nods from his seat beside Rebecca Chen, Copper and Times owner, while Chef Patricia Morales from Verde and Chef Antoine Dubois from Le Petit Coq completed the intimidating lineup. Maya, Rebecca began, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd built a successful restaurant from scratch. Tell us why you think you're ready to lead this kitchen after only 6 weeks of professional experience. I'd rehearsed this answer dozens of times, but sitting across from these industry veterans made my prepared response feel inadequate. Instead, I found myself speaking from the heart. 6 weeks ago, I thought cooking was about following recipes and impressing people with technique. Working here has taught me that real cooking is about understanding your ingredients, respecting your team, and serving food that makes people feel something beyond just satisfied. I may not have years of experience, but I have something that can't be taught. I genuinely care about every plate that leaves this kitchen. Chef Morales leaned forward, her expression skeptical. Caring is admirable, but running a kitchen requires more than passion. How would you handle a situation where your sous chef disagrees with your menu direction? I'd listen to their concerns, because good ideas can come from anyone. But ultimately, the head chef has to make decisions and take responsibility for the results. I'd rather make a mistake following my instincts than succeed by committee. The questions continued for an hour, covering everything from food costs to staff scheduling to crisis management. When they asked me to present my sample menu, I walked them through 5 courses that showcased local ingredients with techniques I'd mastered during my weeks at Copper and Time. This roasted beet salad with goat cheese mousse, Chef Dubois said, studying my notes. The flavor profile is sophisticated, but the execution seems straightforward. How do you balance innovation with accessibility? I believe the best dishes tell a simple story with complex flavors. This salad looks familiar enough that guests won't be intimidated, but the goat cheese mousse technique and the candied walnut garnish create textures and tastes they haven't experienced before. Innovation doesn't have to be flashy to be meaningful. Rebecca nodded approvingly. And your cost projections for this menu? I'd spent hours calculating ingredient costs, portion sizes, and profit margins. Food cost runs at 28%, which maintains our current profitability while allowing for premium ingredients where they make the biggest impact. When the formal interview ended, Marcus walked me back to the kitchen where the dinner prep was beginning. The familiar sounds of knife work and simmering sauces felt like home after the sterile formality of the dining room conversation. "How do you think it went?" Marcus asked. "Honestly, I have no idea. They asked tough questions, and I tried to give honest answers. Either that's enough, or it isn't." Maya, I've sat through a lot of these interviews over the years. Most candidates try to impress us with what they think we want to hear. You just told us who you are as a cook. That takes confidence. The waiting was brutal. Rebecca had said they'd make a decision within a week, but each day that passed felt like a month. I threw myself into my prep work with extra intensity, trying to stay busy enough that I couldn't obsess over every answer I'd given. Sophie, who'd been unusually quiet since learning about the head chef interviews, finally approached me during a slow Tuesday afternoon. "Maya, can we talk?" We stepped into the walk-in cooler, the only place in the restaurant that guaranteed privacy during service hours. "I need to be honest with you about something," she began, her usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious discomfort. "I also interviewed for the head chef position. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Sophie, who'd been mentoring me since my first day, who'd helped me navigate the challenges of professional cooking, was my direct competition for the job I wanted more than anything." "Sophie, I had no idea. Marcus never mentioned." "He wouldn't, but I wanted you to hear it from me before you found out some other way." She paused, studying my face. "Maya, you know I respect your cooking, right? You've grown faster than anyone I've ever worked with. But I've been working toward this opportunity for 3 years. I've been Sophie's second in command. I've covered for Chef Harrison when he was sick. I've trained new cooks and managed inventory and done everything a head chef does except have the title." I understood her frustration, and it made the situation even more complicated. Sophie deserved this promotion based on her experience and dedication, but I wanted it based on my vision and potential. "So what do we do now?" I asked. "We keep working together professionally, no matter what happens. The restaurant comes first, personal ambitions second. Deal?" "Deal." We shook hands in the cold storage room, two colleagues who'd become friends now competing for the same dream. It added a layer of complexity to every interaction, every shared prep task, every moment when one of us had to defer to the other's expertise. The decision came Thursday morning in the form of a text from Marcus asking me to come in early for a private conversation. My hands shook as I tied my apron, trying to prepare myself for either outcome. Marcus was waiting in his office with Rebecca and a folder of papers. Their expressions gave nothing away. "Maya, sit down," Rebecca said, gesturing to the chair across from Marcus's desk. I was scared of failure, scared of disappointing people who believed in me, scared of leaving the security I'd built for the uncertainty of starting over. "Danny, what if I'm not ready? What if I fail and lose everything I've worked for? What if you succeed and build something amazing? Maya, you've already proven you can overcome failure. That potluck disaster didn't destroy you. It made you stronger. Why would this be different?" After we hung up, I spent the day at Copper and Time, trying to see it with fresh eyes. The kitchen, where I'd learned to cook professionally. The dining room, where I'd watched customers enjoy my food. The team that had become like family. It was comfortable, successful, and safe. But comfort could also be a trap. I'd seen older chefs who'd stayed too long in situations that no longer challenged them, who'd let their skills stagnate because they were afraid to risk what they'd already built. That evening, Marcus found me in the office reviewing next week's scheduling. "Maya, you've been distracted all day. Everything okay? I'd been dreading this conversation, but Marcus deserved to know what I was considering. I told him about Victoria's offer, the restaurant spaces, the possibility that I might be ready to strike out on my own. He listened without interruption, his expression growing more thoughtful with each detail I shared. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Maya, I'd be lying if I said I wasn't disappointed. You've become essential to this restaurant's success, and finding another chef with your skills and leadership style won't be easy. Marcus, I haven't made any decisions yet. I'm just exploring possibilities. But you should make a decision, and you should probably take the opportunity. He held up a hand when I started to protest. Maya, I hired you because I saw potential that you didn't even know you had. That potential was never going to be fully realized working for someone else, no matter how much freedom I give you here. But what about the team? What about everything we've built together? The team will adapt, because that's what professional cooks do. And what we've built together is your foundation as a chef. You'll take those skills and relationships with you wherever you go. Marcus pulled out a business card from his wallet. This is my attorney's contact information. When you're ready to negotiate your lease terms and partnership agreements, call him. He specializes in restaurant deals, and he'll make sure you don't get taken advantage of. You're not angry? Maya, I'm proud. 18 months ago, you were a data analyst who got stage fright making lasagna for a company Potluck. Now you're considering opening your own restaurant because Portland's most influential food critic thinks you're ready for it. That's not something to be angry about. That's something to celebrate. The next 3 weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, negotiations, and planning. Victoria introduced me to potential investors who asked probing questions about my business plan, my target market, and my financial projections. I toured restaurant spaces with contractors who explained build-out costs and timeline requirements. I consulted with restaurant designers who helped me visualize how my culinary vision could be translated into physical space. The Alberta Arts District location quickly emerged as the clear favorite. The space had been a coffee roastery, so it already had some of the infrastructure I'd need. The neighborhood was diverse and food-focused, with a customer base that appreciated both quality and creativity. The lease terms were reasonable, and the landlord was experienced with restaurant tenants. But the decision that sealed my commitment came from an unexpected source. I was at Copper in Time late one evening, working on recipes for my potential new restaurant, when Sophie found me experimenting with a braised lamb dish that had been occupying my thoughts for weeks. That smells incredible, she said, tasting the sauce I'd been adjusting for the past hour. It's for the new place, if I go through with it. Sophie sat down across from me at the prep table. Maya, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. Are you hesitating because you're worried about leaving us? Or because you're worried about failing? I considered her question carefully. Both, I think. You know what I've learned working with you this past year? Fear of failure is just another ingredient in the recipe. You can let it overwhelm everything else, or you can use it to make your success more meaningful. Sophie, if I leave, would you consider coming with me as my sous chef? Her face lit up with surprise and excitement. Are you serious? I'm serious. I can't imagine building a new kitchen without you. Your experience, your leadership, your ability to keep me grounded when I get too ambitious. I need all of that. Maya, I would be honored to help you build something from scratch. That conversation removed the last obstacle to my decision. If Sophie was willing to take the risk with me, if she believed in my vision enough to leave the security of Copper in Time, then maybe I was ready to believe in it too. 2 days later, I signed the lease on the Alberta Arts District space. The next 6 months were the most challenging and rewarding period of my life. Restaurant build-outs are exercises in controlled chaos, where every decision has financial implications and timeline consequences. I spent my days coordinating with contractors, selecting equipment, and finalizing design details while spending my evenings at Copper in Time, honoring my commitment to Marcus until my replacement could be properly trained. Victoria proved to be an invaluable mentor throughout the process. She helped me navigate vendor relationships, introduced me to industry professionals who became trusted advisors, and provided guidance on everything from menu pricing to staff recruitment. But more importantly, she helped me develop the confidence to trust my own instincts when faced with decisions that would define my restaurant's identity. Maya, she said during one of our regular check-in meetings, The biggest mistake new restaurant owners make is trying to be everything to everyone. Your job is to create a clear vision and execute it consistently. The customers who appreciate what you're doing will find you. I named the restaurant Sage, both for the herb that had become a signature ingredient in many of my dishes, and for the wisdom I hope to bring to every aspect of the operation. The menu focused on Pacific Northwest ingredients prepared with techniques I'd learned from classical French training but interpreted through my own creative lens. The opening night was scheduled for a Thursday in late October, exactly 1 year after Victoria's review had launched my career as a recognized chef. We'd planned a soft opening for friends, family, and industry colleagues. 50 people who could provide honest feedback before we faced the scrutiny of paying customers and professional critics. That afternoon, as the final preparations were underway, I stood in my own kitchen, surveying the controlled chaos of opening day prep. Sophie was training the hotline cooks on proper plating techniques. James, who'd followed us from Copper and Time, was perfecting the sauce station setup. Emma, now promoted to sous chef, was coordinating front of house and kitchen timing. My phone buzzed with a text from Danny. "Break a leg tonight, sis. Mom and Dad are driving up from Salem. We're all proud of you." At 5 o'clock, the first guests began arriving. Marcus and Rebecca from Copper and Time, several chef friends from other restaurants, food writers from local publications, and the investors who'd believed in my vision enough to fund it. The dining room buzzed with conversation and anticipation, but the guest who surprised me most was Victoria Ashford, arriving alone and requesting a seat at the small bar overlooking the open kitchen. "I wouldn't miss this for the world," she said when I greeted her during a brief lull in the kitchen action. "Maya, you've worked incredibly hard to get to this moment. Enjoy it." The service that followed was everything I'd hoped for, and more. Dishes left the kitchen on time, the flavors were balanced and distinctive, and the reactions from guests were overwhelmingly positive. I watched from the pass as people tasted my food, my recipes, my vision, my interpretation of what a neighborhood restaurant could be. Around 9 o'clock, as dessert service was winding down, I noticed Victoria approaching the kitchen. "Chef Rodriguez," she said formally, then broke into a smile. "Maya, that was an exceptional meal. The seared scallops with cauliflower puree were perfect, and the braised lamb was exactly what I'd hoped for when I first tasted your cooking." "Thank you, Victoria, for everything. The mentorship, the connections, the encouragement to take this risk. The risk was always yours to take. I just helped you see that you were ready for it." She paused, looking around the kitchen where my team was beginning the closing routine with the kind of easy efficiency that comes from working well together. "Maya, there's something I want to tell you, something I should have mentioned earlier. That day at the Thompson Digital Potluck, when I criticized your lasagna so harshly, what about it? I was having the worst day of my professional life. I'd just received news that my editor was canceling my cookbook contract, my long-term relationship had ended the night before, and I was questioning everything about my career and my future. None of that excused my behavior, but it explains why I was so unnecessarily cruel." I stared at her, processing this revelation. "Victoria, you don't need to explain." "Yes, I do. Because I want you to understand that my critique had nothing to do with your potential as a chef and everything to do with my own frustrations and failures. I took out my professional disappointments on someone who was simply trying to share food made with love and effort. And now? Now I'm watching you succeed despite my attempt to discourage you, and I'm reminded that the best critics don't just identify problems, they recognize possibilities. I failed you that day, but you didn't let my failure define your future." As the last guests departed and the kitchen staff finished cleaning, I found myself alone in the dining room of my own restaurant, Sage. My restaurant. The culmination of a journey that had begun with public humiliation and led to professional fulfillment beyond anything I'd ever imagined. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos from the evening, Sophie laughing with guests at the chef's table, James carefully plating the lamb dish that had become his specialty, Emma coordinating service with the kind of calm authority I remembered admiring in Marcus. But the photo that meant the most was one Danny had taken of me during service, standing at the pass and surveying my kitchen with the kind of focused intensity that had become second nature. I looked like a chef. Not someone pretending to be a chef, not someone playing a role, but someone who belonged exactly where she was. The reviews of Sage's opening were universally positive. Portland Monthly called it a confident debut from a chef who understands that great food comes from technical skill guided by genuine passion. The Oregonian praised the thoughtful menu that showcases both classical training and creative instincts. Food and Wine included us in their list of America's most promising new restaurants. But the review that meant the most came from Victoria Ashford herself, published 3 weeks after our opening. Sage represents everything that's right with Portland's dining scene, she wrote. Chef Maya Rodriguez has created a restaurant that feels both ambitious and approachable, where technical excellence serves the larger goal of making people feel welcomed and well-fed. This is cooking with both skill and soul, the kind of food that reminds us why restaurants matter in the first place. 6 months after opening, Sage was booked solid most nights, and we'd built a waiting list that extended weeks into the future. The success was gratifying. But what mattered more was the satisfaction I felt every night as I watched my team execute the vision we'd built together. One evening in late spring, as I was reviewing applications for a new pastry chef position, Victoria called with unexpected news. Maya, I have a proposition for you. The James Beard Foundation is looking for emerging chefs to participate in a special dinner series in New York. They want to showcase regional American cuisine, and I recommended you as the Pacific Northwest representative. The James Beard House, the most prestigious venue in American cuisine, where the country's best chefs had been showcasing their talents for decades. Victoria, that's incredible, but I'm not sure I'm ready for that level of exposure. Maya, you've been ready since the day you decided to trust your instincts over my criticism. This is just the next step in a journey that started the moment you chose to keep cooking, despite being told you weren't good enough. The dinner was scheduled for October, exactly 2 years after the potluck incident that had changed my life. I spent months planning a menu that would represent not just my cooking style, but the entire Pacific Northwest culinary tradition: salmon with wild mushrooms, Oregon lamb with seasonal vegetables, and a dessert featuring hazelnuts and marionberries. The night of the dinner, I stood in the James Beard House kitchen putting final touches on dishes that would be served to food writers, celebrity chefs, and industry leaders from across the country. The pressure was intense, but it felt familiar now. The same focused energy I'd learned to channel during busy services at Copper and Time and later at Sage. As the servers carried out the first course, I allowed myself a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought me here. From data analyst to line cook to head chef to restaurant owner to James Beard House guest chef, each step building on the previous one, each challenge preparing me for the next. The dinner was a success beyond my wildest expectations. The salmon was perfectly cooked, the lamb was tender and flavorful, and the dessert earned enthusiastic applause from a room full of people who'd tasted the best food in America. After service, as I was packing my knives and preparing to return to Portland, a familiar voice called my name. Maya. I turned to see Victoria Ashford approaching with a woman I didn't recognize. I want you to meet someone, Victoria said. This is Amanda Chen, the publisher at Gastronomy Press. Amanda, this is Maya Rodriguez, the chef I've been telling you about. Amanda extended her hand with a warm smile. Maya, I've been following your career since Victoria first wrote about Copper and Time. We'd love to discuss a cookbook deal with you. A cookbook? My own cookbook, featuring the recipes and techniques I'd developed over the past 2 years of professional cooking. I'm interested, I said, accepting her business card. But I have to ask, how did you know to find me here tonight? Amanda looked at Victoria, who was trying unsuccessfully to hide a pleased smile. Victoria has been one of our most valuable scouts for emerging talent, Amanda explained. When she told us about a young chef in Portland who'd overcome early criticism to build something exceptional, we knew we wanted to meet you. Later that night, sitting in my hotel room overlooking the lights of Manhattan, I called Danny to share the news about the cookbook offer. Maya, this is unbelievable. Your own cookbook? Wait until Mom and Dad hear about this. Danny, do you ever think about that potluck disaster and wonder what would have happened if Victoria had been nicer about my lasagna? He was quiet for a moment, considering the question. You mean if she'd given you polite encouragement instead of brutal honesty? Exactly. I think you would have kept cooking as a hobby, stayed at your data analysis job, and maybe never discovered what you were really capable of. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to us turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. He was right, of course. Victoria's harsh critique had been devastating at the time, but it had also forced me to examine my commitment to cooking and decide whether I was willing to pursue it seriously or give up entirely. The choice to keep going, despite her dismissal, had led to everything good that followed. The cookbook project took 18 months to complete, during which I continued running Sage while documenting the recipes and techniques that had become my signature style. The process forced me to articulate not just how to cook specific dishes, but why I'd chosen to approach food the way I did. From Potluck to Profession, A Chef's Journey Through Failure and Success, was published the following fall to positive reviews and strong sales. The book tour took me to cooking demonstrations and interviews across the country, where I shared the story of how public humiliation had become the catalyst for professional achievement. At every event, someone would ask about Victoria Ashford's role in my career, whether I harbored resentment toward her for her initial criticism, whether I felt vindicated by my subsequent success. "I'm grateful to Victoria," I would always answer, not because her critique was kind, but because it was honest enough to force me to become better. The worst thing that happened to my cooking confidence became the best thing that happened to my cooking career. 3 years after opening Sage, I received a call that brought my journey full circle in the most unexpected way. "Maya, this is Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Thomson Digital. I know this might seem strange, but I'm organizing our annual company retreat, and I wondered if you'd be interested in catering the event." Thomson Digital. My former employer, where the Potluck disaster had occurred, where Victoria Ashford had first dismissed my cooking as amateur. "Dr. Walsh, I have to ask, do you know about my history with Thomson Digital?" "Of course. You're Maya Rodriguez, former data analyst turned celebrated chef. Everyone here is incredibly proud of what you've accomplished. We'd love to have you cater our retreat as a way of celebrating your success." The irony was too perfect to resist. I'd be honored. The retreat was held at a resort outside Portland, and I arrived with my catering team to prepare a 3-course dinner for 200 Thomson Digital employees. As I set up in the resort's kitchen, I thought about the last time I'd cooked for this group, the disastrous lasagna that had earned Victoria's scorn and nearly ended my culinary dreams. This time, I was serving pan-seared salmon with wild mushroom risotto, herb-crusted lamb with seasonal vegetables, and chocolate tart with salted caramel. Dishes that represented everything I'd learned about cooking with both skill and passion. As the servers began carrying out the first course, I noticed a familiar face in the crowd. Victoria Ashford, now a regular at Sage, and someone I considered both a mentor and a friend, had been invited as the keynote speaker for the retreat. She approached the kitchen during a break between courses, wearing the same confident smile I remembered from our first contentious encounter. "Maya, the salmon is exceptional. But I have to ask, do you remember the last time you cooked for a Thomson Digital event? How could I forget? You told me I should stick to ordering takeout. And now you're one of Portland's most celebrated chefs, serving food that would be impressive in any restaurant in America. If that's not proof that initial failures don't determine final outcomes, I don't know what is." After dinner, during the coffee and dessert service, Dr. Walsh asked me to say a few words to the group. I stood at the front of the room, looking out at faces that included former colleagues who remembered me as a data analyst, newer employees who knew me only as a successful chef, and Victoria Ashford, whose criticism had inadvertently launched my career. 3.5 years ago, I brought a lasagna to a Thomson Digital potluck that was publicly criticized as amateur and inadequate. That criticism was accurate. My technique was flawed, my seasoning was inconsistent, and my presentation was unprofessional. But what the critic didn't see was the passion behind the flaws, the potential beneath the problems. I paused, looking directly at Victoria, who was listening with the kind of attention she'd once reserved for dissecting my cooking. That day, I had a choice. I could let the criticism destroy my confidence and give up on cooking, or I could use it as motivation to become better. I chose to become better, and that choice led to everything good that followed: professional training, restaurant experience, leadership opportunities, and eventually my own restaurant. The room was completely silent, everyone listening to a story that had become central to how I understood my own journey. The lesson isn't that criticism doesn't hurt, or that failure doesn't matter. The lesson is that how we respond to criticism and failure determines whether they become obstacles or opportunities. The worst thing that happened to my cooking confidence became the best thing that happened to my cooking career. The applause was warm and sustained, but what mattered more was the conversation that followed as employees approached to share their own stories of professional setbacks that had led to unexpected successes. As the evening wound down, Victoria and I found ourselves alone on the resort's terrace, looking out at the lights of Portland in the distance. "Maya, I have something to tell you," she said. "Something I should have mentioned years ago." "What's that?" "That lasagna you brought to the potluck? It wasn't actually terrible. The technique needed work, yes, and the seasoning was inconsistent. But the flavor combinations were interesting, the pasta was properly cooked, and you could taste the effort and care that went into making it." I stared at her, stunned by this revelation. "Then why did you tear it apart so brutally?" "Because I was having a terrible day. Because I was frustrated with my own career, and because I'd forgotten that behind every dish is a person who cares enough to cook." I focused on the flaws instead of recognizing the potential. "Victoria, if you'd been encouraging that day instead of critical, do you think I would have ended up where I am now?" She considered the question carefully. "Honestly, probably not. Kind encouragement might have made you feel better, but it wouldn't have forced you to examine your commitment to cooking and decide whether you were willing to pursue it seriously. Sometimes harsh truth, even when it's delivered poorly, serves a purpose that gentle lies cannot." We stood in comfortable silence, two people whose professional relationship had begun with conflict and evolved into mutual respect and genuine friendship. "Maya, I want you to know that watching your career develop has changed how I approach food criticism. I still identify problems when I encounter them, but I try to recognize potential and effort as well. You taught me that the most important question isn't whether someone's cooking is perfect, but whether they have the passion and commitment to keep improving." 5 years after the potluck incident that nearly ended my culinary dreams, Sage was recognized as one of America's outstanding restaurants by the James Beard Foundation. I was nominated for Rising Chef of the Year, an honor that represented recognition from my peers in the professional cooking community. The award ceremony was held in Chicago, and I invited my entire team to join me for the celebration. Sophie, now my partner, in a second restaurant location. James, who'd become our executive sous chef. Emma, who was planning to open her own place with my mentorship and financial backing. As I sat in the audience waiting for the awards to be announced, I thought about all the people who'd contributed to this moment. Marcus, who'd given me my first professional opportunity. Danny, who'd encouraged me to take risks even when they seemed impossible. My parents, who'd supported career decisions they didn't always understand. And Victoria Ashford, whose brutal honesty had forced me to confront my limitations and decide whether I was willing to work hard enough to overcome them. When they called my name as the winner of Rising Chef of the Year, I walked to the stage in a state of disbelief. The James Beard Medal felt solid and real in my hands, tangible proof that the journey from data analyst to celebrated chef had actually happened. "Thank you," I said into the microphone, looking out at an audience that included many of the chefs I'd long admired. "This award represents not just my work, but the support of everyone who believed in my potential, even when I didn't believe in it myself." I paused, thinking about the story I'd told so many times about how failure had led to success, how criticism had become motivation, how the worst professional moment of my life had eventually become the catalyst for the best. I want to dedicate this award to everyone who's ever had their dreams challenged by harsh criticism. Use that criticism as fuel. Let it motivate you to become better rather than allowing it to convince you to give up. Sometimes the people who doubt us the most end up teaching us the most about our own resilience. After the ceremony, as my team celebrated at a restaurant in Chicago's River North neighborhood, Victoria approached with a bottle of champagne and a familiar smile. "Congratulations, Chef Rodriguez. You've come a long way from that company Potluck." "We both have," I replied, raising my glass. "Thank you for being honest enough to hurt my feelings, and patient enough to help me heal them. Thank you for proving that talent and determination can overcome any obstacle, including the opinions of critics who forget that their job is to encourage excellence, not discourage effort." As we toasted to the unlikely partnership that had shaped both of our careers, I reflected on the strange alchemy that had transformed professional disaster into personal triumph. The woman who'd once seemed like my harshest critic had become one of my most valuable mentors. The failure that had felt like an ending had actually been a beginning. Later that night, back in my hotel room, I called Danny to share the news about the award. "Maya, I'm so proud of you I could cry." "James Beard Rising Chef of the Year? Do you remember when you called me after that potluck, convinced that Victoria Ashford had destroyed your dreams?" I remember thinking my cooking career was over before it had really begun. And now you're being recognized as one of the best young chefs in America. Maya, that's not just a success story. That's proof that we never know where our lowest moments might lead us. He was right, of course. The path from that humiliating Tuesday afternoon to this triumphant Thursday evening had been unpredictable, challenging, and ultimately transformative. I'd learned that resilience mattered more than talent, that persistence counted more than perfection, and that the courage to keep trying after failure was the most valuable skill any chef could develop. The next morning, as I prepared to return to Portland and the restaurants that had become my life's work, I received a text from Victoria. "Maya, thank you for showing me that critics and chefs can be allies instead of adversaries. Your success has made me a better writer and a better person." I smiled, typing back, "Thank you for showing me that honest criticism, even when it hurts, is a gift. Your harshness made me a better chef." As the plane lifted off from Chicago, carrying me back to the kitchens where I'd learned to transform raw ingredients into something nourishing and meaningful, I thought about all the young cooks who might be facing their own moments of professional doubt and public criticism. My advice to them would be simple. Listen to the criticism, learn from the feedback, but never let someone else's opinion determine your worth or your future. Sometimes the people who doubt us most end up teaching us the most about our own strength. And sometimes the worst thing that happens to us becomes the best thing that could have happened. The potluck disaster that nearly ended my culinary dreams had instead launched a career beyond anything I'd ever imagined. Victoria Ashford's harsh critique had hurt my feelings but strengthened my resolve. The journey from amateur home cook to professional chef had been difficult, unpredictable, and ultimately more rewarding than any path I could have planned. As Portland's skyline came into view through the airplane window, I knew I was returning home not just as a successful restaurateur or an award-winning chef, but as someone who'd learned that our responses to failure and criticism define us more than the failures and criticism themselves. The food critic who'd trashed my cooking at a company potluck had inadvertently given me the greatest gift of my professional life: the motivation to prove her wrong by becoming everything I'd always had the potential to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.